Let her conquer fear and fall like a soul. I run into the heat of day, like a knight I fight until the fight is won. In the rain I save each and every one till this war is won.
With Liberations being the first game after the ending of the Desmond Miles framing device, it was high time for Ubisoft to show the boys and girls at home how Abstergo was going to carry on without their penultimate experiment. And if you viewers didn't think it could possibly get worse than that, well, hold on to your pants, because the game's intro starts us off with plenty of plot holes. The framing device of Liberations is that Abstergo, for completely ridiculous reasons, decided to get into the console gaming market, and they started selling game consoles to consumers that allowed them to play genetic memories of what I assume are their Animus experiments, since the general audience isn't going to have Assassin Templar ancestors to exploit for profit. I call this a plot hole because the purpose of these gaming devices is that they contain edited genetic memories to try and win over the general audience to the side of the Templars, using the edits as propaganda. The reason that this is a plot hole is that the whole Assassin Templar thing is supposed to be a shadow war that the general public doesn't explicitly know about. That's why these devices are being sold by Abstergo and not Templar LLC, because the Templars and Assassins work in the background, covert ops to get the job done, so having the general public be won over by a faction that should not exist to them in reality was a really stupid idea and a complete waste of money, since the Templars canonically have the overreach to accomplish the same thing to a wider audience through the use of radio and television, just to name a couple of examples that make infinitely more logical sense than this one. But whatever, Ubisoft story writers fell asleep on their canon history books, and so we get this baffling mess of crazy talk starring Aveline, a French Negro woman born and raised in colonial New Orleans. Yeah, it's your typical sandbox character designed out of the most downtrodden factions of the era, but Ubisoft gets away from that somewhat in Liberation, since they actually use her slavery and woman roots to some actual ends instead of just saying she's a second-class citizen. Thankfully for Aveline, after the typical hero parent's death intro where Aveline gets left behind in New Orleans as a 9-year-old by the worst mother in 1730s America, she got brought into the fold of a wealthy Aunt Madeline and her father figure, French guy. I have no idea what his name actually is. It was long and French, and he was barely in the game in the first place, so I didn't care. With this luckily gained education into both a woman and a lady, Aveline searched out and found the Assassin's Brotherhood of Colonial Louisiana, and starts her Liberations quest already decked out with crazy advanced abilities. A new one introduced in Liberations is for Aveline to adopt different personas through costume changes that grant her different abilities. Her assassin persona is probably the most useful since she gets the most weapons, the fastest climbing and running, and most of the missions in the game. The lady persona is less useful by the end of the game because she's the slowest and can't climb. However, the lady compensates for this by being the least noticeable, and she's able to seduce some guards with one button as an instant hiding place. And then there is the slave persona, which is the middle of the two. The slave can jump and climb, does have weapons but not many of them, and is also hard to notice, especially when carrying an object. These three personas do help flesh out preparation and strategies of the campaign quest, since you can tailor your approach for the situation coming up instead of having to drum it up on the fly with the default assassin costume. The personas fit the character greatly, expand the gameplay challenges, and even offer the player a bit of character customization if you literally cannot stand Aveline's default green dress. And speaking of that dress, and I'm not one of Ubisoft's researchers, but I'm not too sure that the amount of cleavage from Aveline's lady persona was exactly appropriate in the 18th century. Sure, she's supposed to be getting on her way to becoming married, and due to the generic strong female characteristics that she has, she's rejecting that idea at every turn. To just put this point to bed, Aveline is a good female character, not the best, and she does get a bit of the stereotypical generic traits of the strong female character mixed into herself. She is a strong female character, so she rejects relationships, she's very independent, and is able to beat up douchebags like all the boys do. She also uses her femininity to deceive and trick people for her own ends. She's also nice and charming to all of the characters in the game, especially the ones that she really shouldn't be too. Obviously, she cares for her friends and will help people like Elise and Monsieur Blanc through thick and thin. I'll take it as a win if she doesn't end up in bed with Blanc, because frankly he's very irritating, and the only thing that bugs me about him is his god-awful speech pattern. He inserts ums, silences, and breaks in his dialogue all the time, and none of it makes any flippin' sense. It's like Ubisoft just wanted to give this guy a disability, and it's just way too over the top. I'd rather take the stuttering and random silence for crap's sake, rather than this annoying nonsense.
Right. So, business. Do you recall our rival, Monsieur Boucher, who was twice caught watering his wine?
Elise, on the other hand, is the brash, stubborn, forewoman archetype character that Aveline becomes good friends with on the Bayou, where she and her crew smuggles things into and out of New Orleans, along with disrupting trade and business from anyone they don't like. Elise is pretty funny and incredibly useful on the quest with her, so I would let her tag along with Aveline on any mission she wanted to, which is a great thing to have since Aveline seems to have no clue of what she's doing. Assassin's Creed Liberations feels a lot like Assassin's Creed Revelations 2, and in the worst ways possible. Liberations is a short game, probably clocking around 5 or 6 hours of playtime with 8 full chapters of gameplay. But it feels like Revelations again because of the total lack of side quests throughout the game and the idea that the plot isn't going anywhere. Aveline just gets out of bed one night and then goes out to kill a bunch of Templars who are Templaring it up in vague ways totally unconnected from each other. Aveline has no central goal in mind, and even when she does pick it up halfway through the game, she gets distracted from it at the drop of a hat. The central point of the game is your typical Creed plot. The assassin has to carve their way through the local Templar order so that they can eventually kill the top dog on the ladder and save the area from corruption and all the badness in the world. Liberations also throws in a precursor plot device like the other games with the Prophecy Disc, but the game goes actively out of its way to never tell the player why it's important or why they should get it, other than it's there and it's supposedly dangerous. The only thing it does by the end of the game is tell another bullshit cryptic message from the precursors that means absolutely nothing to anybody. For all intents and purposes, the Prophecy Disc is essentially an alien's dictaphone, nothing more. A big reason why the plot feels schizophrenic and contradictory at times is because of that whole Templar propaganda thing that the Mini-Animus is drumming up to put the Templar characters in higher morality than the other ones. And while this should be applauded, the subtlety in how Ubisoft writes this edited dialogue means that I can't tell what Abstergo is trying to tell the general public. It should obviously be that the Templars are doing all the right and the Assassins are doing all the wrong, but it keeps stepping over on itself, especially with the decision to have a Templar propaganda video game star an assassin as the protagonist. The Templars are still in the antagonistic role, and the Abstergo editors don't do enough to get around that to make themselves out to be the good guys. And what complicates this more is another plot hole in the Abstergo gaming machine plot. A person or group calling itself Erudito has managed to hack into every Abstergo machine and restore the unedited memories to the general public. This is accomplished by assassinating random citizens in town that Erudito has coded the new data to, and what makes this Erudito stuff even worse is that the unedited memories are found completely randomly. There's no minimap icon and no indication of where they are in the game until you run face first into them. At least 2 of them are story required, so you'll be introduced to them at the very least, but I don't know about actually finding them all without a guide. There were a couple extra side quests concerning Aveline assassinating her business competitors, who are each totally corrupt 110% to keep her on the up and up. She can also recruit outstanding people to her trade ships and even help liberate some slaves. And I know that this is a modern retelling trope to make sure that history isn't offensive, but I don't like it when every modern colonial character has to be this super liberator out for social justice who hates all the slavery and must personally stop all of it everywhere. Yes, a lot of characters should be like this to have them make sense as protagonists, and there was this new polarizing rise in anti-slavery in colonial America, so it makes historical sense that this happens, but the issue I have is that it shouldn't be 100% applicable to everyone, and you don't have to be pro-slavery about it either. A good example to follow would be Connor from the last game we just did. Connor didn't spend his time focused on liberating slaves, but he did consider it a good thing if he could get to it. But by the end of the game, he was watching slave markets and didn't instinctually go up there and murder the auctioneer's boss, and set fire to the slave ship. You can keep it to a point, but not to the point that you start whitewashing history. Sorry to get all political there, but it's a big part of Aveline's character arc, and it's also in the name of the video game, so we had to talk about it. But the real kicker comes later, after it's revealed through her quest to cut off the Templar source, that it was Aveline's own mother, Madeline, that was the person running the Templar Order, and she was the person helping Aveline free all those slaves. I would guess that Madeline had funneled the free slaves down to Chichen Itza or to some other Templar site because she needed the labor and expertise. Yep, after all those Templars and all those stealth missions and all that wandering in the swamp and in the city, it turned out that her own mom was the one behind everything. Apparently the ultimate plan of the Templars was just to get the prophecy disc and be shown the path to salvation or something like that. Also, Madeline wanted to recruit Aveline, which eventually worked in the edited version of Aveline's history, but was also shown that she killed Madeline in reality to show off the prophecy disc message to herself. There's honestly not a lot to talk about with Liberations. The most that I can say about it is that if you're really in need for a Creed fix, then Liberations will tide you over for a couple days. It's designed reasonably well, looks and plays nice, but there's a lot of usual positioning programming issues that make it a bit hard to get around the sandbox and whatnot. The side quests are typical for modern Creed games. They're easy to get in and out of, usually done in about a minute with 3 sentences of lore. No real reason for doing them since the rewards are pointless. There's a ton of useless collectible side quests in the game that offer up nothing but themselves as rewards. You can still buy up all the properties in New Orleans and the Bayou, but there's no real reason to do that because they give you no rental income and there's nothing to invest into in the whole game. There's also some trading ship mechanics you can conduct, but like I said, there's nothing to buy in the game, so the economy is useless. The maps are small and samey, the Bayou sandbox is hard to navigate with little to explore, plus all the campaign missions are pretty boring since they're all self-contained assassinations targeted around one guy and his plan to harm Aveline's friends. Ultimately, Assassin's Creed Liberations is a scattershot product, not focusing on one particular mechanic or idea, nothing really unique about the game to make it stand out, and decides to design itself after the most pedestrian and bland ideas and tropes from the Creed series to the point that it felt like a knockoff of AC Revelations. Liberations feels like there's little effort put into the game, which falls in line with Ubisoft's attitude towards portable games. I would only recommend it to the crazy Creed fans who need anything and everything from the series to literally survive. There's little to nothing to appreciate about Aveline's Odyssey through the Louisiana Templars, especially when one of the highlighted features was the story about Abstergo editing over history to win over the people of the world, when none of that plan makes any sense, and even in context, the edited and unedited versions of cutscenes don't change much about my attitudes toward the characters in the game or Abstergo itself. At the end of the day, Liberations only costs $20 on the PSN store, so it isn't a big investment. Buy it if you want, and if you don't, you aren't missing out on anything. Hopefully next time will give us a bit more meat on the bone, but until then, here's your scoreboard. and a final victory for gamers. Thanks for coming in today.